Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Folkloring, which is going to be all about the folklore of teeth. And it's kind of an unusual one because I hadn't planned this one out in sort of the overall season, looking at what I was going to do. It came up kind of organically for me. I was in a group of people who have old houses, because I have a very old house, and somebody had posted that they had found some teeth hidden in a wall when they were doing a renovation. And I thought to myself, well, it's probably some sort of protection magic. And I went to look it up and thought, what does it mean when it's teeth, when you're hiding it in the walls? You know, you hear about mummified cats and shoes and lots of different things, but I'd never heard of teeth. And as it turns out, I couldn't find anything on what the meaning of putting teeth in the walls might be. So I asked a friend of mine about it, who's also interested in folklore, and he had never heard of it either, but he sent me an article from 2018 where there were 3 different locations in Georgia, 3 different cities, where there had been dentists' offices, and they were doing renovations in these buildings, and these offices had been around since like the early 20th century. And as they were doing these renovations, they found like thousands and thousands of teeth in the walls. And I don't know if it was a common practice, not sure, still can't find anything about teeth in the walls. So if anyone does have information on why people are doing this, I would love to hear about it. It might have just been a common practice to dispose of it as far as the dentist's offices, but the one that's the renovation in the home it has really gotten me curious. So I started thinking more about teeth. And as I was looking around to try and find, if this was some kind of protection magic, I started finding lots of folklore about teeth, some of which you'll be very familiar with, like the tooth fairy, but there's also a lot of other teeth-related folklore. And so I thought, why not? It came to me like this. I'm going to dive in. But before I do any of that, I'm going to tell you how I've been folkloring lately. Now, it is still summer here, and so I'm getting tons of herbs, doing lots of gardening stuff, as you do. But another thing happened to me, also plant-related. So I was having a little bit of a disagreement with my boyfriend, and it was just very frustrating, and it went on for several days, and we didn't resolve anything. And I was just feeling very overwhelmed and hopeless. Now, coincidentally, he had recently given me a jasmine plant. And it's lovely. I've always wanted one, never bought one for myself. It was a very thoughtful gift. I was very appreciative. And I went out there one morning, and it had just finished flowering. And so, it's now, I didn't know if it was going to flower again this year. But as it turns out, I went out the next morning after we had been arguing, and it started flowering again immediately, which was very surprising to me. And so I thought, I'm going to take that as a sign of, this was a plant that is something beautiful. I would have never gotten it for myself. It's lovely. And I thought, what? I just need to remember what's good in our relationship and stop focusing on something that is dissatisfying, because things aren't going to change our situation. We're in a long distance relationship, basically, and that's fine. It is what it is for now. And I thought, there's so much good. We're doing this, having a relationship that's a little more difficult than others. And so I used the flowering of that plant to remind me through that symbolism that our love has blossomed. And so moving forward, I just thought, I'm not going to worry about circumstances we can't change right now. So that's been my little bit of extra plant folkloring this time around. So, teeth. It was such an interesting rabbit hole to go down, and I'm glad I did. And I'm not going to go into the etymology of it, but I do find it so interesting that the word toothsome refers to food that's delicious, but it can also be used to describe someone who is sexually attractive. So in both cases, tasty, right? I love that word. So I am going to start with baby teeth and kind of work my way through life. And so there's something called natal teeth. And natal teeth are teeth that are present at the time of birth. So they already have teeth when they're born. There's also neonatal teeth, which are teeth that develop within like the first 30 days or so of life. And so there's a lot of beliefs around these very early teeth that most babies don't have. In Malaysia, a natal tooth is believed to herald good fortune, and Chinese communities consider the presence of these teeth as a bad omen, and the affected children are considered to be monsters, and like misfortune will come to them. They draw misfortune. So interesting when you see the same exact thing, but good luck in one society, bad luck in another. Now, in England, it was believed that this condition of having these natal teeth would guarantee conquest of the world. So I don't know, it seems like there's a lot more children that have this than could possibly conquer the world, but that was an ancient belief. And superstitions around these kinds of teeth have been recorded in lots of different civilizations, and they sometimes would be an indicator of the child's future. King Richard III was born with teeth, and in some cases that was believed to show that there was some sort of demonic parentage or attachment, or that it also could have meant that another child was on the way soon. So lots of beliefs about those. Now, as far as baby teeth go, moving forward in time a little bit in human life, when people start to lose their baby teeth, there are many, many practices around what was done with those teeth. And those have just so many different ways to get rid of those teeth, basically. And in many cases, the teeth were discarded. And it could be that teeth could be thrown into the sun, thrown over the roof of a house. And that would often happen while saying a prayer, placed in near a mouse hole. And I'm going to get into a little more detail of these. And sometimes they would be planted in a garden or a field as sort of like that new growth and encouraging those new teeth to grow in. In many cases, the teeth were swallowed, sometimes by an animal, sometimes by a child or a parent. And early on, the most common animal to sacrifice the tooth to offer the tooth to, would have been a mouse. And you see that in a lot of different cultures. And this was in the hope that the child's teeth, again, were going to come in strong. And there are certainly examples of other, strong-toothed animals besides mice and in some cases rats being given the offering too, but the most common by far is mice. Now, a couple of more specific examples. In Greece, Vietnam, Singapore, India, Sri Lanka, and China, children throw their baby teeth on the roof when they fall out. And in Greece, the children wait for a mouse or pig to retrieve it. Sri Lankans await a squirrel, while in India, anticipation is for the sparrow to return bearing a new tooth. And Cherokee Indian children would throw the tooth on a roof, repeating, "Beaver, put a new tooth in my jaw," 4 times. So you see that obviously all over. In medieval England, it was popular to bury a child's baby teeth. And this was for beliefs connected to the afterlife. There was a superstition that if a child did not dispose of his or her baby teeth properly, the person would wander in the afterlife for all of eternity in search of them. In Africa, children throw lost upper teeth on the roof, But if it's lower teeth, they bury them in the ground. And I suppose that symbolism is, the upper teeth go up, the lower teeth go down. But the opposite is true in East Asia, where lower teeth are thrown on the roof and upper teeth are buried, thrown on the ground, or hidden under the bed. In some of Middle Eastern countries, such as Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt, kids are encouraged to toss their teeth upward toward the sky. And Brazilian children will throw their teeth outside for the birds, who they believe will only take them if they're clean. While in El Salvador, they expect a rabbit to come get the tooth, regardless of its cleanliness. And throughout Central Asia, baby teeth might be put into fat and fed to dogs, with, again, the wish that the children's replacement tooth would be as strong as the dog's tooth. And if there's no dog available, then the teeth will be buried near a tree so the tooth will have strong roots. In some Central American countries, they make jewelry out of lost baby teeth. And that's a tradition that's said to originate from some ancient Viking customs, where articles that belonged to children were regarded as powerful and good luck, and sometimes they would carry them into battle. So, lots of different throwing of teeth, having animals eating teeth, but I do want to move on to the one that most people listening will probably be familiar with, which is the tooth fairy. And the tooth fairy is actually a fairly recent invention. It dates back to roots at least to the 17th century, but it really was an American invention in the early 20th century. And so, quick evolution of the tooth fairy. Back in 300 AD, Saint Apollonia, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more later, was canonized. And there is a lot of belief that that saint was an inspiration for the tooth fairy. And then we go all the way to 1697, where Marie Catherine Lejeumel de Barneville writes The Good Little Mouse, which is back to that idea of the mouse being given the offering of the tooth. Now, in the early 1900s, American children begin to give their teeth to an unspecified fairy in exchange for money. And it's not until 1949 that the official term tooth fairy appears for the first time in the magazine Collier's. And in the 80s, the tooth fairy began to be used as incentive for better oral hygiene. And obviously today, it's all over the world that people know about the tooth fairy. And at first, in the years prior to World War II, as I said, they were giving the teeth to unspecified fairies, but that's the time frame in which they started participating in the pillow ritual and putting it under the pillow. And as far as the money part of it, that really has... It started to form in the Middle Ages in something called the tandfæ, which is the tooth fee in Scandinavia. And Vikings would pay children for a tooth that has fallen out, and those were worn on a necklace for good luck in battle. And the idea of exchanging a tooth for coins advanced throughout Europe, but it didn't involve a fairy at that point. And so in the late 20s, there was a play written by Esker Watkins Arnold, and it was called The Tooth Fairy, and it helped kind of solidify that myth of the tooth fairy, like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. And so that brought the idea of the tooth fairy to popular culture. And there is even a Tooth Fairy Day, although I could not definitively tell you if it's February 28th or August 22nd, because I saw references to the Tooth Fairy Day on both of those days. And that just may be a cultural thing. So I talked a little bit earlier about some similar beings to the Tooth Fairy, and there was of course, the tooth mouse. And that's in Spain, Guatemala, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Mexico. Kids will put their lost teeth under pillows, expecting money left by El Ratoncito Perez, which is the rat Perez. And kids in Argentina will instead leave their teeth in a glass. Now, they'll still expect a visit by a magical thirsty rodent who will leave treasure while they sleep. In France and Switzerland, the little mouse is the name of the rodent that whisks away discarded baby teeth for cash and candy. And there is a popular French fairy tale called The Good Little Mouse, written in 1697, which tracks the heroic actions of one tough mouse that, after changing into a fairy, defeats an evil king by hiding under his pillow and knocking out his teeth. If you're in South Africa, the tooth is left in a slipper for the tooth mouse, who leaves a gift behind instead of money. So lots of examples of the tooth rodent. Now, in Lancashire, England, there is a evil water witch named Jenny Greenteeth, and she's used in a lot of cases to encourage children to brush their teeth and take care of their teeth. But a less dark version, a more benevolent example, is in Venice. And Marentega is the Venetian version of the generally Italian Befana, who's a benevolent crone who gives children gifts like Santa Claus. But she also gives children gifts when they lose a tooth. And as I alluded to earlier, in early Christianity, Saint Apollonia who is the patron saint of dentists because of the sort of grisly nature of her martyrdom, in which her teeth were extracted. And she's often depicted with pincers holding a tooth and some palm fronds. And in some depictions of her, the palm fronds are positioned in a way that sort of resemble fairy wings. And so it's easy to sort of see that crossover and how she might have been early inspiration for the tooth fairy. Now I'm going to move on to some symbolism about teeth and different ways that people look at the symbolic meanings of teeth. Now, in Greek mythology, dragons' teeth were believed to possess magical powers, and if you would sow them in the earth, they would give rise to fully armored warriors known as Spartoi. And so the symbolism there was strength and resilience. If we look at vampire teeth, which is obviously a staple in folklore and popular culture, they're often depicted with sharp, elongated teeth that are used to drink the blood. And these fangs symbolize immortality and the transcendence of death. In some African cultures, a person's teeth are believed to have a special power that is associated with their smile. And so a captivating smile is seen as a sign of charisma and the ability to win people's hearts. And in traditional Chinese medicine, they connect each tooth to specific organs in the body. And I know we talked in a previous episode about how times of the day were connected with the organs, and they also connect different organs to the teeth, and sometimes they would extract teeth to alleviate certain ailments. And as far as Native American symbolism goes, various native tribes have used animal teeth as symbols of strength and connection to the animal world. And these are often incorporated into jewelry and art. And so, whatever the symbolism of that particular animal is would carry through the tooth in terms of the strengths of the animal as well. Now, in the Wordsworth Dictionary of Symbolism, Cultural Icons and the Meanings Behind Them, written by Hans Biedermann, he observes that in pop culture and some folklore that teeth often symbolize vitality or sexual potency. And he points out that numerous Dickens villains intimidate female characters by flashing sharp teeth. And in Bram Stoker's 1897 Dracula, the fangs were obviously described intimately as penetrating the soft necks of the victims and are really sort of phallic in nature. And also in dreams, teeth can have sexual symbolism. Freud believed that if a woman had a recurring dream that her teeth were falling out, that it was an unconscious desire to have children. But if a man repeatedly dreamed about his teeth falling out, this symbolized a fear of castration or of losing his sexual potency or ability. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in more specific detail at the very end of the episode, which is why I had to put a warning on this episode that it is adult themed, but that's for the end of the episode. Now, teeth are often seen as being protective, right? We saw that with the Vikings. We've seen it in a couple of different places. And animal teeth with other charms were often hung near the entrance of the home to ward off evil or bad luck in Italy in the Renaissance era, but also ancient African tribes. And the placement of these teeth played a role in the type of protection they can provide. So when they were worn around the neck in the case of like the Renaissance Italians, these pendants containing teeth were said to be able to prevent possession by demons, which is handy because who wants that? And it's speculated that the use of teeth in sort of primalistic attacks like biting and snarling may be why they were seen as protective by ancient peoples. And another reason that has been speculated on is that the teeth protect the entrance to the body that is the mouth, which is going to be foreshadowing to the end of the episode. So as far as teeth as protection, they can prevent unwanted objects like pieces of food that are too large from, further entering the body and possibly choking on it. And the Australian tribes viewed shed or extracted teeth as objects that needed protection themselves in order to prevent harm coming back to the individual that they came out of. There is also the belief that one person's tooth health could be transferred to someone else by having them swallow the tooth, giving them the tooth, or even carrying the tooth of a diseased person might prevent toothaches. Interestingly, in another toothache-related belief, there were ancient tribal societies in Australia that heavily associated the teeth with rain. And elderly members of the tribes might have been able to, sense pressure changes before it rains in their teeth, in addition to their joints. And changes in pressure can affect fluids, connective tissues in joints, but they did associate it with the teeth. And a ritual tooth extraction would have been performed in order to end the wet season, and the extracted tooth would then be discarded into a watering hole to prevent further rainfall. There were other Aboriginal rituals around teeth and extracting them. They would extract teeth to ensure rebirth, and they would protect any extracted teeth from rival tribes. And some tribes would even hold ceremonies to remove the life from the teeth and sever any magical connection to a person. And even if, after the life force was removed, these teeth were kept away from any other magic, so it couldn't affect the people that they were extracted from. So interesting ritual around extracting. Now, in ancient Ireland, they had a belief around wisdom teeth. And wisdom teeth are very interesting. It does not mean when they come in that you're more wise. It just kind of happens around that age where people are starting to make the transition from, childhood, young adulthood to adulthood. But the Irish bards had a ritual in which they would bite their thumb with their wisdom tooth before singing a verse and thus offering a sacrifice to the gods. Now, if you ever want to make a pilgrimage to see a relic that is a tooth, there is a town called Kandy in Sri Lanka. And in that town, there is the Temple of the Tooth. And apparently the architecture is beautiful, but it has a religious relic that is said to be the Buddha's tooth that was given to the Sri Lankan monarchy in ancient times. And it's said that whoever holds this relic is said to hold the government of the country. And the tooth was passed around through various kings and holy men who hid and moved it and relocated it over centuries. But now the tooth is housed in a dedicated temple inside the royal palace complex of the former kingdom of Kandy, and worshippers can visit the relic, which is held in a golden stupa inside the two-story shrine, and it's encased in 7 gold caskets, which are engraved and inlaid with precious gemstones. So that has got to be beautiful. But a little bit closer to home, at least for me, is the story of, we've all heard the story of George Washington, at least Americans will have, and how he had wooden dentures. Actually not true. He never did have wooden dentures. But by the time he became president in 1789, at that point, he only possessed a single tooth, so he needed some dental prosthetics. And there was a dentist named John Greenwood, who is thought to be the father of modern dentistry. And he made several sets for Washington, and he used gold, different metals, hippopotamus ivory, which has a very thick enamel coating. And so to create upper and lower mouth plates, but they would be connected by gold wire springs. And in one version, both human and cow teeth were secured into plates using brass screws. Now, the problem with this was that these springs that were used to keep them together and in his mouth were always pushing at his mouth and pushing his mouth open. And so he had to stay vigilant just to keep his mouth closed and not have it hanging open. And he found them so irritating that he would keep his speaking engagements to a minimum. And his second inaugural address was the shortest in history at only 135 words, which goes quick. There were never any wooden dentures. Another story, a little bit more modern. Sometime in the 1950s, there was a dentist, Dr. Joseph Stamp, and he lost his German Shepherd Prince. And like many people who love their pets, he wanted to create a memorial to his dog. And because he was a dentist, he happened to have thousands of teeth he had extracted, and he embedded them in a concrete block to place outside his office in Elkhart, Indiana, in the U.S. And he had practiced dentistry in Elkhart for 60 years until he died in 1978. And he pulled thousands of teeth and preserved them in chemicals in a barrel in the basement of his office. So even after he had created this block, he still kept putting teeth into it after it was already made. And the addition of new teeth became an event that neighborhood children would anticipate and want to attend. And there's all kinds of teeth that are part of the block. Canines, molars, well taken care of, neglected, and sometimes pieces of teeth rather than the whole teeth were used, like crowns. But even at this point, the dentist's family and his descendants, they have no idea why he chose this method of commemorating the life of his dog, of these thousands of teeth in the block. Anyway, that moves us on to the talk of dental care in general. Now, early on, one of the first things that people used to take care of their teeth were chewing sticks. And there was something called a miswak. And there's lots of different spellings for it. I've even heard it siwak or siwaki. And these particular sticks were from a tree called the arak tree. And it's also referred to as the toothbrush tree. And those grow in Asia, Middle East, Africa. And the qualities that they have are antibacterial, antifungal, anti-carcinogenic, and anti-plaque. And so they act on pathogens when these sticks are chewed on and rubbed on the teeth. And interestingly, a lot of the chemical properties that give these sticks the antibacterial, antifungal, etc. properties are used in modern applications. And so a lot of commercial products that use these chemicals are toothpaste, mouthwash, irrigants, chewing gum. And so it's, once again, one of those examples of how early folk medicine really does carry forward into the modern day. In addition to the chewing sticks, which of course later morphed into our modern toothbrush, one of the tools that people used to keep up with their dental care was the toothpick. And it is so old that it predates modern history. And there are archaeological findings from all around the world that confirm that the skulls of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens have shown very clear signs that teeth were regularly picked and cleaned with a tool like a toothpick. In those earliest periods of our history, soft and hardwoods were used for oral hygiene, soft grasses were used to floss, and these were found, all of these tools were found where our prehistoric ancestors lived. Now, as far as the toothpicks go, they were, as many things were, they were made from what was available in the area where people were. Wood, ivory, bone, shells, bird claws, walrus whiskers, just depending on where it was, people used what was around them. And of course, the arrival of the Metal Age brought with it a revolution in toothpick use and creation. And even at the earliest age of bronze metalwork in northern Italy and the East Alps, they produced small bronze toothpicks. And this tradition of metal toothpicks has continued on. Even high-profile citizens in the Roman Empire used little pieces made from silver and bronze. And Roman Emperor Nero was famous for his public use of silver toothpicks on festive occasions. And even after the fall of the Roman Empire, other nations continued to refine and create toothpicks from, again, materials they found all around them. Norse Vikings used wooden toothpicks. Others even used the frontal teeth of lizards attached to small sticks. I don't think I would do that, but hey, you use what you got, right? And by the time we got to 17th century Europe, the nobility had brought with it the rise of very extravagant gem-encrusted toothpicks, but also with cheaper and more easily manufactured wooden sticks, porcupine quills, that sort of thing. Now, the person that introduced us to the modern version of a toothpick was the American inventor Charles Forster. And in 1869, he was working on a family farm in Brazil and took the note of the toothpicks that were created by local workmen. He quickly devised a plan for machine manufacture, secured the patent rights, and started selling his products across America. And very soon, the use of industrial-made toothpicks spread all across the country and across the world. And it became not only an integral part of a meal, but a fashion statement, which soon gave birth to the habit of chewing on a toothpick in public. So, as foreshadowed earlier, we have now reached the adult portion of this episode. So, we're going to talk about the most terrifying of all kinds of teeth, vagina dentata. And vagina dentata is Latin for toothed vagina. And it's a folktale tradition in which a woman's vagina is said to contain teeth, with the implication that any sexual intercourse might result in injury, emasculation, or even castration for a man involved. Now, in South Africa, there is a story of a fish that inhabits the vagina of the, quote, terrible mother, unquote. And the hero of this story is a man who overcomes the terrible mother, breaks the teeth out of her vagina, and so makes her into a woman. And in some versions of that story, one tooth is left. Now, in some Native American traditions, there's a story in which the trickster god Coyote, or Coyote if you happen to say it that way, which I do not, but Coyote outwits a wicked old woman who has placed teeth in the vaginas of her daughter and another young woman that she was keeping prisoner in order to seduce, kill, and rob young men. Now, Coyote kills the woman and her daughter, but marries the other young woman after knocking out the teeth in her vagina, except for, and I quote, one blunt tooth that was very thrilling when making love. So far be it from me to kink shame whatever Coyote is into. Now, in Hinduism, Andhaka, who is the son of Shiva and Parvati, although not aware of it, is killed by Shiva when he tries to force the disguised Shiva into surrendering Parvati. Now, Andhaka's son, Adi, takes the form of Parvati to seduce and kill Shiva with a toothed vagina in order to avenge Andhaka, but he's also slain, so that didn't work out. In Japan, there is an Ainu legend that a sharp-toothed demon hid inside the vagina of a young woman and emasculated two young men on their wedding nights. Consequently, that woman sought help from a blacksmith who fashioned an iron phallus to break the demon's teeth. So there are lots of stories like this, and there are other similar stories that don't necessarily involve teeth per se. You know, there's stories like this with spikes and different kinds of things. And I think that it's so interesting because on the one hand, it's a cautionary tale, right? Don't trust a mysterious unknown woman because you don't know what could happen. But it also, I think, speaks to a deep fear about vulnerability, right? These stories where, this is a place where men can be vulnerable both physically and emotionally. And so I think that these kind of cautionary tales really speak a lot to the fear that they will not be safe, which is funny when you think about how often women are not safe in the presence of men. But it's definitely a story that you see all over the world. So it does speak, I think, to a deep kind of fear about what might happen if they are too trusting to a woman. So lots of good tooth-related lore. And to wrap things up, how do you use teeth in folkloring? How do you incorporate the practice should you care to? And I think there's a couple of different practical ways you can do that. Obviously, you can make jewelry. You can use teeth on an altar. You can even be mindful when you're brushing your teeth or you're flossing, and think about what your teeth mean as far as protection. And, certainly if you're going to make jewelry or any kind of amulets or anything like that, you can get them very easily. I've got buffalo teeth, I've got coyote teeth, I think I've got bobcat teeth, and those are easy. You can get them online. Obviously, I'm always going to advocate for our local mom and pop businesses, and so I'm going to say shop local if you can. And if you've got local stores by you that do cater to that, check them out and see if they've got anything that you might be able to use. But really, I think a lot of the power of using teeth is if you do have a magical practice. I talked earlier about using teeth as protective magic, and also some of the ways that you can look at the symbolism of teeth. And you might want to think about using teeth in healing magic, right? If you think about the teeth containing traces of life force, then you might want to be able to either use the healing power or maybe a connection to your ancestral spirits. If you want to use an amulet against disease, or if you want to affect the life force of an enemy to protect against evil, maybe for good luck, you can add them to witches' bottles, and maybe it's going to be the tooth of a person that the witch's bottle is made for. You might want to try your hand at necromancy, and because teeth are directly linked to the dead, you might try to attract spirits that way. If you wanted to ease a toothache or ease teething, you could use milk teeth of children who had previously lost their teeth in order to help with that. Other sympathetic magic, although I don't advocate this, you might use it to cause a toothache or cause pain. And the symbolism of it might give you courage in communication or in giving a speech, trying to have someone stop gossiping, right? Using teeth in order to bite, like we were talking about earlier, that sort of biting energy of an enemy. Taking something by force. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can use the symbolism of teeth in order to focus your own rituals or your own spell work if you happen to do that. But I think that the symbolism is very strong, and if you're drawing on that energy, just use some of the things that we've talked about here today. So anyway, that is all of the folkloring I can think of in regards to teeth. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and keep folkloring.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.